Hi, I saw on YouTube that you were asking about people who have scary experiences like getting kidnapped, so I'll share my story with you. Did you know there's actually businesses that you can hire to do extreme kidnappings? I didn't until I got kidnapped by one of them. It was by accident. They were supposed to kidnap a different girl who kinda looks like me. Her dad owns the building that I worked in last summer, and she wanted to be kidnapped for ransom, and her friends were going to try to rescue her. She comes to the building a couple of times a week, and so I guess the setup was that her friends called the kidnappers one morning and told them that she was on her way and described what she was wearing. The building has a parking garage where I always park. I parked and walked to the elevator like normal. When I was just about there, I saw a clown with balloons and boxes in his arms, and he was dropping stuff. He looked at me and asked if I could give him a little help. So I went over to help him, and he said thanks, and he asked me to hold a couple of boxes for him. He handed me the boxes, and then all of a sudden, a big hand was on my mouth really hard. Before I could do anything, the clown grabbed my legs and they threw me into the van. There were two more masked men in the van and they jumped on me. They pinned my arms and legs down, and one of them grabbed my mouth so I couldn't scream. I was so terrified. The clown slammed the door shut and I was trying to fight, but they were heavy and kind of crushing me, so I could barely move. The guy took his hand off my mouth and forced a ball gag in my mouth, and they flipped me over. He buckled the gag and then twisted my arms behind me and tied my hands. Then they blindfolded me and just kept tying me up more, like my arms, my legs, my feet, everything. I was crying and scared to death. They held on to me until the van stopped. They pulled me out and carried me to a chair and tied me to it. They told me to make myself comfortable and behave, and they wouldn't hurt me as long as my dad paid the ransom. I had no idea what they were talking about, so I just sat there, scared of every sound and every touch, and trying to think of what will happen when they can't get the ransom for me. My hands were a little numb, and the ropes were tight, so I had no chance of escaping. A while later, I heard them come over to me. They untied a lot of the ropes and got me up from the chair. They walked me a few steps and then pushed me down onto a bed, and they hogtied me. They left and I lay there until they came back and told me they would give me a drink if I don't scream. They gave me some water and they stuffed a large cloth in my mouth and put lots of tape over my mouth. They carried me over to a pole and they tied me to it. I could hear them walking around, and a few times they came over and checked my ropes and felt me up. Then all of a sudden, a guy was talking very nicely and saying they were sorry and they were going to untie me so I don't need to be scared. They took off my blindfold and I saw them without any masks. They were untying me and apologizing really hard for kidnapping me by mistake. They were told to kidnap the blonde in the black pencil skirt, black pumps, and beige top, and that was almost exactly my outfit, so they thought I was the girl. They found out I wasn't her when they sent a picture of me to ask for the ransom. I was so relieved to know that they were not criminals and I was going to be okay. They were really nice, and they actually paid me pretty good to try to make up for it. I wasn't hurt other than some rope burns, but it took me a while to not be afraid when I was out alone. I quit that job because I couldn't go back to that parking garage. I didn't even want to go in and get my car, so the kidnappers drove my car out for me. I can't believe that somebody would pay to be kidnapped like that. She wanted to be roughly kidnapped and tied up and felt up. It was only over my clothes, thank God, and her friends wanted to try to rescue her. It was going to be with laser tag guns for their weapons for the shootout. She apologized to me for it too, and she was crying when I told her about it. I haven't talked to her since, so I don't know if she ever did her extreme kidnapping or not. Thanks for listening. My boyfriend works for a think tank in Washington, D.C. I can't tell you which, but what I can tell you is that it's one of the most influential think tanks in the United States. The phone numbers on his cell phone belongs to some of the most powerful people in politics, business, and even religious groups. They are people who shape and influence our history and future. I met my boyfriend 2 years ago when my best friend Kelly set me up on a blind date with a friend of her boyfriend. I wasn't sure at first because of the age difference. I was 25 and Nelson, my boyfriend, was 39 2 years ago. But Kelly insisted I see him in person before I decide he's too old for me. To tell you the truth, I was sure I wasn't going to get romantically involved with him, but at the time I was single for a year and figured it'd be a good way to get back in the dating scene. You know, get my feet wet before jumping in. Long story short, I went head over heels for Nelson. He was fitter than all my friends in their 20s, his charisma was mesmerizing, and there was something about dating a man over boys. That's not to say he's perfect, because he isn't. For one thing, his life is too structured. He's very passionate about his work, and he never lets anything get between him and it. I moved in with him 3 months ago and learned quickly he needs his space when he's working. This works out well for us because although I'm not as rigid as he is, I too enjoy the company of a partner who understands the need for personal space. When we first started dating, he was very secretive about the work he did. He's very knowledgeable and a fantastic conversationalist, so he had no trouble dodging questions and changing subject. But even a man as disciplined as Nelson would lower his guard as he got to know me better and fell in love with me. Love has a funny way of breaking down barriers, and that's exactly what happened to both of us. He never thought he would live together with a girlfriend, and I never thought I would fall in love with a man of his age. Nelson's house is the Fort Knox equivalent of suburban homes. The front door looks like a regular wooden door, but it's actually a metal door that opens assisted by a passive electric motor. It just means that it's a very heavy door, but it behaves almost no different than the regular doors. There are no traditional keys on any doors. They are all biometric locks for the exception of the office, which also requires a card to be swiped. All that security just means one thing. He's got a lot of secrets in that office, and he's doing everything he can to keep them protected. 2 months ago, he forgot to take one of the folders he was reading the night before and in the morning. I called Nelson on his cell to let him know he forgot his folder, but he didn't answer. It's nothing out of the norm. He let me know from early on when we started dating that his clients were not the type of people that he could simply put on hold. I had no intention of taking a pic at the contents of the folders and was only going to slide it under his office door. Little did I know you couldn't even fit a piece of paper underneath it. The thing was literally airtight. I wasn't working that day because my studio had been repainted just a day ago, and I planned to go back to work the next week when the new paint smell would be tolerable. I sat down on the couch and opened the folder. My thinking was that he wouldn't leave a folder in the living room like that if it was something so secretive. There were many documents in the folder, but most of them I couldn't make sense of. There were so many code words and acronyms, it almost seemed like they were purposely written in such way so that the person without the inside information couldn't understand it even if they had access to them. But some of the words used in the documents bother me a lot. These are some that I remember from the top of my head. Early warning. VIP evacuation, in the event of the release of the package, containment phases, monitoring infection are some of the troubling phrases I remember. Then there are certain words like pathogen, CDC, global, and pandemic. I closed the folder and stayed sat on the couch for over an hour, thinking about what I just read. Knowing fully well how influential Nelson's think tank is and how closely he works with many powerful individuals, to say that I was troubled by the documents would be a major understatement. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about the documents and what they all meant. Nelson showed up a couple hours later and I asked him straight up what the documents were. I was a little surprised that he wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, he apologized to me for leaving the folder in full view. He said he worked on normal things like swaying policies one way or another, but that at times his work involved things in the nature of emergency crisis management. He simply explained the documents away by saying that it's a recommendation put forth by his think tank to the United States government. Emergency management recommendation happens on all levels, and the think tanks are responsible for many policies that have been adopted by our government. He said it was no big deal. It's pretty much what happens on a daily basis in Washington. Would you be surprised if I didn't buy what he was saying? I've been with this man for 2 years, and I know when he's lying. That morning, he was full of lies. I understand that the lies don't necessarily translate to the documents being a sure bet to an end-of-the-world scenario that will be played out in the near future. Chances are it really was business as usual in Washington and has little to no consequence to the lives of plebs like us. But what if the document is a real plan? Some grand plan cooked up by the most powerful and influential individuals who seek to change the course of human history. Maybe the shadow government is operating right under our noses in the guise of think tanks, and we would never suspect it. If it does happen, or when it does happen, I would look back to the day I sold those documents as the day I read my own death sentence. Or maybe I've already sealed my fate by sending you this message, and you might go down with me not long after. I know it's only speculation and very unlikely to happen even if what I saw were real. I try to reason with myself every day to convince myself that I should forget and move on, but I just can't get this question out of my head. What if? Alright, that's it for this video, and I'd like to thank Alicia and Katie for sending me their stories. Also, I don't know why, but about halfway through the narration, I lost my voice, as you can kind of tell most likely. Not completely, but enough to make the recording difficult, so I do apologize if the narration was subpar on this one. So let's talk about the stories. I spoke to Alicia after she sent me the story, and fortunately she has told me that the experience hadn't scarred her for life, which is really a great news. If there's any of you who think it wasn't a big deal, try this. Try blindfolding yourself and walk around outside for about 5 minutes. Now multiply the fear you felt by about 1,000 times, and that's the very least that Alicia had to go through when she was kidnapped. I normally don't judge people's hobbies or lifestyle, but the people who enjoy these kinds of things are seriously deranged or deluded, because for one thing, the thrill that you feel from the kidnapping isn't real. You know you're going to be safe the whole time, so how is that a thrill? And two, you can get innocent bystanders hurt so easily during the process of the fake kidnapping. What if an employee decided to leave late and try to help out? What if someone outside heard something and tried to help out? What if Alicia had asthma or was prone to seizure? In my book, the girl who hired the fake kidnappers is an idiot. And had Alicia not been so generous, she could be looking at a serious lawsuit against her. Okay, I'm gonna stop there because this story really makes me fume. So let's move on to Katie's story, and I gotta say, your story is spooky as hell. If you live in the US and know anything about politics, then you know just how much influence those think tanks have in Washington. Because basically, those think tanks are run by former politicians and oftentimes funded by giant corporations. I just cringe every time I read something about those think tanks on newspapers because they're not elected government officials. I never voted for them, and yet they wield as much power, if not more, than the elected ones. You know what? That's going to do it for me tonight. If I think more on these two stories, then my head is going to explode. Thank you everyone for watching, and as always, stay safe.